What is the most important part of a story? Is it the world, the action, the villains, the motivation? Or is it the story, the struggle, the relationships? Maybe you think it depends on what kind of series you're talking about. An action series? Well, the action is the most important part. A romance series? Well, the romance is the most important part. But to me, there is one aspect to a series that's so wildly important, way more important than any other aspect. So much so that this one aspect, to me, can make or break a story. I read a lot of Webtoon series, so much so that people are actively surprised by my numbers. Not really a flex, more just embarrassing to admit. I read a bunch of different series and topics. Romance series, action series, drama series, sci-fi, superheroes, slice of life, comedy, mystery, heck, even some thriller and horror stuff, even if it is my least favorite genre. If there's a genre, I've probably read it, and if there's a trope, I've probably seen it. And my absolute favorite genre, the fantasy genre. The fantasy genre, to me, is just built different. Magic, swordsmanship, kingdoms, and medieval crap is all just so amazing. So much so that owning a sword is one of my active life goals. I mean, look at these swords, they're so cool. The point is, fantasy is spectacular and covers a lot of tropes. And one of the most popular, in general and on my channel, is the isekai trope. Ah yes, good old isekai, a trope I can never escape from. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. Some of the most interesting and fascinating stuff that I've had the pleasure of reading and discussing has been from this trope. If you don't know what an isekai is or haven't watched any of my many videos discussing it, strap in viewers, we're in for a ride. The general gist of the isekai trope is, what if the fantasy world and the modern world were somehow mixed up? Wow, wouldn't that be crazy? There are plenty of branches of tropes, but there are three main ones. The standard isekai, when a normal human, through either death or a wish or magic, gets thrown into a fantasy world, hilarity ensues. The reverse isekai, when the fantasy elements appear in the real world, through towers that spring up from the ground, gateways that magically open in the world, or random system intervention, or I don't know, more magic, I guess. Humanity gets magical powers somehow, and hilarity ensues. Last, but also least, because there's not a lot of them, is what I call the opposite isekai, mainly because I don't have a name for it. When a fantasy monster or creature gets thrown into a standard person in an everyday world, or basically becomes a normal human in that world. Hilarity ensues. You get it though. You mix fantasy and modern life and you get something interesting and often fun. Isekais are everywhere. And if we're being honest, yeah, some of my favorite series are from the isekai trope. Omniscient Reader is a fantastic reverse isekai. The Greatest Estate Developer is perhaps one of my favorite series, period, and is an isekai, and I Was the Final Boss is how I developed that opposite isekai thing. They're all amazing series, and I highly recommend that you go and read them right now. But, like I said, isekais are everywhere. But why are they everywhere? What makes them so appealing? What keeps people coming back to this trope? I think there are plenty of reasons why people love the modern fantasy mix. Obviously, in these series, the action is often a standout. Fantasy, when it's not a princess or princess equivalent falling in love with a prince or prince equivalent, is all about that action. And yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. Swords, magic, Dungeons and Dragons, all things that are highlighted when they're, you know, in a fight. Sword fights are majestic, magic can be beautiful, monsters and dragons are just so much more imposing in a fight. A lot of fantasy is known for its action, and many isekais in their many copies wearing different classes excel with that action. However, I don't really think that's why these series stand out as much as they do. Even my favorite isekai, The Greatest Estate Developer, doesn't have the most amazing action out there. It's solid, but it stands out for a different reason, and that reason is the characters. I've said it before, I'll say it again, I love characters. I can stand by any story as long as the characters we read are interesting enough to read and watch. And I think no series shows this more than I'm the Max Level Newbie. This series feels like a weird combination of every single reverse isekai trope series. An overpowered protagonist, he knows way more than just about everyone else. We got systems, we got special powers, we got dungeons and towers, monsters and magic, the rags to riches story, video game like mechanics, all these different elements from different series, combining all with one fascinating main character. You see, our main character, Jin-hyuk, isn't exactly a hero. I'm the Max Level Newbie follows a world that just got thrown into chaos as the infamous VR game The Tower of Trials becomes reality, forcing all of humanity to climb the tower, giving them 90 days to complete each floor or perish. The Tower of Trials was so notoriously difficult that no one has ever beaten the game. Most people haven't even got to double-digit floors. Most, except one person. Our main character, Jin-hyuk, a mukbang streamer, the people who eat food on stream. But more importantly, for the last couple years, he's been slowly but surely fighting and climbing his way to the top. And finally got there. But literally the next day, the tower from the game itself emerges, and the game stops being a game. Fun! A reverse isekai with a video game twist. I love video games, this should be great. But this actually brings us to Jin-hyuk himself, and my claim from before. You see, I think heroes, noble pillars of virtue and honor and nobility, have kind of fallen off. Many series, especially the ones that I love, and especially a lot of the ones I talk about, have main characters that aren't really heroes. There are, of course, exceptions. I think the two biggest ones being the Lazy Lord Masters the Sword and Elyseed, having our two main characters be pretty heroic, but it works as well as it does with those series because our main characters are typically more underdogs. They focus on putting hard work and effort into training, into all this stuff, and being kind people works more because they're not so overpowered. They sometimes lose, and that's part of the story. However, being heroes doesn't work well with these other kinds of stories. Having a super strong, overpowered, noble, virtuous, kind hero can get really, really boring. They don't struggle in the same way that heroes of old do. So instead of trying to make these overpowered protagonists pure of hearted heroes, why not just not make them heroes? Like I said, heroes have kind of fallen off, especially with the isekai and overpowered protagonist tropes around. Strong and kind is overused and can be a bit boring, especially when there's so many of these types of series. I said at the beginning that there's one thing that I consider the most important aspect to a series, and to me that is and will always be the characters. The characters in a series are the driving force for anything and everything in a story, and the biggest failure of a story is not to make the characters good or bad, right or wrong. Instead, it's to make them disinteresting and boring. And I'm the Max Level Newbie does not do that. Because Jin-hyuk works as well as he does is because he is by no means disinteresting or boring. He is incredibly fun and also not a hero. He's scummy, he's a crook, he's a thief, he's selfish, he's immoral. He pretends to care for others while only caring for himself. He will and has lied to get what he wants. He literally stabbed one of his teammates in the back once. And I don't mean betrayal, I mean literally stabbed someone in the back. Jin-hyuk is not only not a good person, he's basically every trait you want to avoid in a toxic partner, yet I still love him? Honestly, it makes some sense. He kind of represents the way to handle these types of characters in these tropes for the future. Not power-wise, even though he has a cool copy power thing, but personality-wise. He's just fun. Plain and simple. Reading and watching his actions, his interactions, his insults, his lies, his morally bankrupt plans, and his motivation make I'm the Max Level Newbie way more fun than other series of a similar genre. which makes it a series that I keep on going back to. Who is he gonna scam next? How is he gonna lie and trick his way out of this situation? Who's he gonna fool to get the most out of someone? Long gone are the days of heroes being heroic. Well, I say long gone, but there are plenty of series that are still around. They're great, but there are more and more series that focus in on characters who shift away from that heroic stance into something a little more fun and honestly a little more human. Look, I love to read about someone who I can be like, but I also like to read about someone who is just as flawed, if not more flawed than I am. It's crazy that I want someone as kind of toxic as Jin Hyuk in more series, but it's true, because having fun and morally flexible characters, especially in such a creative and fantastical environment that the isekai trope provides, is an absolute blast to read. And that's the point of a series, to have fun, to enjoy yourself, right? So make sure to check out I'm the Max Level Newbie, and any of the other series I mentioned here today, updating every week on Webtoon.